Welcome to Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast, the space where research meets the real world. I'm Dr. Danielle Dickens. This episode focuses on being Black, a woman, among other identities in navigating the workplace with Dr. Danielle King, who's an associate professor in industrial organizational psychology at Rice University. So, as we think about the experiences of Black women due to their identities of being Black and a woman, among other identities, that may impact the ways in which Black women experience discrimination, how they cope with experiences of discrimination, and how they have to even experience barriers to advancing within their careers or advancing within leadership positions. And so it's important for us to speak on those topics in terms of the research out there, but also what are the ways in which Black women can be resilient, right, in face of these experiences of discrimination, in face of being the token or the only Black woman in the workplace. So this week's episode features Dr. Danielle King being interviewed by Dr. Danielle Dickens. Dr. Danielle Dickens, and I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing Dr. Danielle King, who's an associate professor of psychology at Rice University. So I just want to thank you, Dr. King, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with me today.
Happy to be here. Excited to chat with you.
Can you tell me about who you are, your career journey, and your research interests?
Absolutely. Who I am a very curious person, and I think that led me to the path that I'm on now through grad school into academia. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, born and raised there, and then went to Spelman College for undergrad, our alma mater. And then I knew when I took an AP psychology class that I was really interested in psych. And so I decided to major in psychology. And then both of my parents are entrepreneurs. And so I was just really interested in business. I also lived through Hurricane Katrina. I was in high school. And so I saw, businesses and communities and people trying to overcome and a lot of disparities and inequities manifest in literal, life and death differences. And that was really hard to see and witness and watch in a community in a city that I love so much. So all of that came together into my majoring in psychology and my minor in business. And then I learned that there's an area of psychology that combines the two. So industrial and organizational psych, looking at all things psychology at work. And so that's what I pursued my PhD in. And now I'm a professor and I teach courses on motivation and leadership. And my research lab is all about resilience. So what are the stressors, traumas, difficulties, challenges that everyone faces? And also what are challenges that are unique to people based on identities that they hold, like racism, sexism, and the combination of those? And what does it look like to have resources at an organization that actually help people not have to be resilient so often, first of all, and then also not just get through it every time, but actually thrive.
We hear this a lot in terms of what does it mean to navigate the workplace? What does that look like, especially as it relates to your area of expertise and being IO? But what does it mean to, as a Black person, particularly as a Black woman?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. And my brain goes in two different branches when I think about answering that. And the first is that there's so much diversity even among our experiences, right? As Black women, I appreciate Spelman so much for showing me that up close and personal. But there's a lot of differences, like depending on the industry, depending on the organization, depending on the work group. It really just depends on your unique situation as a Black woman, like what your day-to-day feels and looks like. And then simultaneously, there are some shared challenges and experiences. We know the disparities in leadership. And so it is very rare that you're going to be a Black woman in an organization and see ample representation of people who look like you at higher levels in the workplace, because that's just the statistics just aren't there, right? We also know some of the stuff that we've studied in my lab is microaggressions in the workplace. And so we know that many Black women experience microaggressions, which are those subtle, insidious, very common slights or, images, which is not seeing representation is one example, or just comments that people make that communicate a negative view, right, of your group. And so the stereotypes around women, around Black people, and then that intersectional, the stereotypes of Black women, sometimes those negative stereotypes are communicated in subtle ways. And sadly, navigating the workplace as a Black woman means that those subtle ways that racism and sexism manifest, we don't really have policy and procedure to address it because it's harder to detect, right? It's like they're not naming it and saying this is because you're a Black woman. So your strategies for reporting or handling it are few and far between at present, which is really challenging.
Mhm. Similar to what you were saying, navigating from Spelman and going to graduate school and beyond is when I think I really noticed those challenges. And so that's what, sparked my interest in doing my research on identity shifting, right? And, altering the way that you talk and behave to navigate different spaces such as the workplace. You've done a lot of research in this area on resilience. And so, if you can talk about some of those findings and particularly what it looks like for Black women being their authentic selves and being resilient in the workplace.
Yeah, I appreciate that question so much because whenever I talk about race and resilience, I want to be really thoughtful and careful to say, it's not just all bad. It's not only the negative side of things. Yes, we do need to identify and address the bad parts, right? Like the microaggressions, the everyday discrimination, the harassment, the abusive, leaders or people not supporting Black women or believing them. We need to address it. And also, what you talked about, like the authenticity piece, the identity shifting, there are unique perspectives and skills and abilities that you have from learning to navigate the current structures and systems that we occupy and that we live in, right? Like the multiculturalism of I can move into different environments and I can speak in different ways and I can connect with different cultures, and that is something that I think can is taxing, right? And I know that you've talked about this too and done this research. It's taxing, it takes energy, and it's also a skill and a strength. And I think we've seen some examples of that. Like I love the posts on social media where, there will be a misunderstanding if it's something related to Black culture. And if you don't have representation in your workplace, you're not able to reach the clientele. You're not able to, market in the same ways. And so there's so much benefit in diversity. There's so much benefit in us being able to be authentic and really talk about our culture and our perspective and our experiences if we want to contribute those ideas, right? And those unique experiences that we have and that we've had to have. And so in some of the work that we've done, one of the main findings I would say across my resilience research is that resilience is all about resources. You have to have resources, and resources could be a lot of different things, right? Time, energy is a resource, money, of course, is a resource, tools, support, mentorship, all of that is resources. And what we know is that resources are not equally distributed across society. But giving women, giving Black women, giving Black people access to resources is a critical key way to help people be able to overcome, the stressors that everyone faces at work. Because I don't know anyone who hasn't had to be resilient, but knowing that it's not just a personality trait. It's not you have it or you don't, you're resilient or you're not. No, time and time again, what we've seen in the literature is that when people are given resources, when they're given a break, they're given opportunities to recover, they're given support, that's when we see that resilience manifest.
So, if someone does not have some of those resources that you mentioned, how can one create those resources for themselves? And also, and it could be different, but also what I'm what came to mind for me is also boundaries. Some of it sounds like I'm going to establish these
Yep.
boundaries in terms of the time I give to this work relative to my personal time. So if you can, talk about that, of like how can I create the resources if they don't have them, and then is that the same thing as boundaries?
I would agree that yes, creating boundaries and having boundaries with work, which has been my life struggle and journey, is one of those ways that we protect our resources. So having resources available to be resilient can come about in a couple different ways. The theoretical framework that I use in a lot of my studies is conservation of resources theory. And in that theory, they talk about you can protect your resources, and boundaries is one way to protect them. You can also, in a separate vein, build new resources, right? If you're like, oh, social support is the resource I need, and I don't have a lot of it, you can, go out and find your communities and build those relationships or establish those connections. Like I've started a virtual writing group with a few other Black women professors that, I'm like, okay, I need some social support because writing can be so isolating. So when I'm like, I feel like I need it, I'm generating this new resource that I feel like I don't have. But I do think boundaries is a great example of I won't let this or whatever this is further deplete my resources. So boundaries in itself, I don't think they always generate resources, but protecting what we have is also just as important to fight against depletion, which we know leads to burnout and exhaustion. And once we get to the point of burnout, it's really hard then to build resources because you have to have some, right, to generate them. Like I have to have energy and time to start a writing group and to organize it and to make the Google Calendar. So yeah, I think boundaries is a great example of one of those ways we can protect those resources that we do have.
Now it seems like everybody is tired and burnt out from work. As the expert in this area, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it because I'm predicting that a lot of it has to do with COVID-19 pandemic, a racial social climate, but what is contributing to this burnout that we're just seeing from a lot of people, especially as it relates to Black people within the Black community?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of factors I think contributing to what we're noticing, which is a lot of people being tired, a lot of people being on edge, which is one of those ways that exhaustion and burnout can manifest. The loneliness epidemic that people are talking about, people not feeling as socially connected to love and support as a social resource. I think the pandemic absolutely, understandably contributed to that. We had loss and grief and uncertainty so in our face every day for so long. That is absolutely something that will deplete our cognitive resources while we're still expected to keep going, right? Like keep showing up to work, keep doing things, keep society functioning. I feel like most people did not get a second to breathe, catch our breath, and take a break and recover. The way that we often think about resilience is you don't stop, you just keep going. I don't think of it that way. I think taking a break, even there's research on micro breaks where it's like in the middle of the day, I need to go for a walk, right? Like I may not be able to go to Fiji like I would love to, but I can definitely go walk around this beautiful campus and, look at nature, which helps us recover resources. Absolutely, I think the pandemic was uniquely depleting and challenging for a lot of different reasons. And then, like you said, simultaneously, as Black people, we had to watch what we've talked about in some of our work and called mega threats, right? So there's IO psychology and organizational behavior research on mega threats. And it's these highly publicized events in the media where someone is, a victim of some crime and you share an identity with that person. And so that's what we had to do. And we wrote a paper in 2016 called Calling in Black, where it's like, I just want to call in Black. Like, I'm tired. I need to reaffirm my humanity to myself because clearly society isn't clear on it for some reason. But navigating what I don't call the racial reckoning, what I call the moment of racial awareness, because I don't think we've reckoned and fixed things. But this like intense awareness of racism simultaneously with this intense awareness of the unknown and our mortality and, exhaustion, that's going to change us. That's going to create some needs for recovering and building resources. Absolutely. So I think that's a part of it. I also think that one of the good things, like I said, I'm always like, I can balance it with the silver lining. One of the good things too is I think that we are more comfortable now talking about burnout and being tired and exhausted, because I know my grandmother was. Like, I know the generations before us were also exhausted, but I will say that we're not there yet. Like, there's still a lot of stigma around mental health related stuff, but I do see more and more of myself and, our generation and friends and people in academia even being willing to talk about how exhausted we really are in the ways that we hope the system will change. And I'm very encouraged by that.
Yeah, me too. We know that policy is important because that's how things could actually change at the systemic level. So, if you could talk about what are some of the policy implications of your research?
Yes, you brought up our authenticity paper, and that one I was really excited about because it's all about policy, and it's saying we talked about the depleting nature, like the challenges of authenticity, specifically for Black women and for people who hold multiple stigmatized identities, and how, not being able to be authentic at work is depleting, and you feel like you got to leave part of you somewhere else. So that separation of self doesn't always feel great. But also choosing to be authentic, knowing, stereotypes that people hold, whether it's from the microaggressions, the things they've said or done, or just fear of that judgment that we understandably encounter in society. We talk about, that decision point that people have to make in the workplace, specifically Black women, as one critical example in our population. And we talk about the power of policy in making that something that is a bit lighter and less of a, sticking point where people every day have to navigate and be vigilant and think through, who do I need to show up as today to succeed or survive? And so we talk about organizational policy, and we give a legislative policy example of the Crown Act as something that can support Black women in reducing hair discrimination. So for us choosing to wear our natural hair, not being something that organizations should be using to fire or not select people, and that we really need policy that names the things that we should be doing to communicate that that is a part of our culture and climate in this place, and that, leaders and organization have the power to say inclusivity in the language that we use, the restrooms in this place, the holidays that we acknowledge. There's a lot of opportunities for organizational policy to communicate to the people that we hire and bring in that inclusivity is our way here. It is a culture and climate. And if you don't fit with that, then this is not the place for you. And I think that's how we can start to make safer workplaces for, people from these stigmatized groups like Black women.
Mhm. What I've been hearing more and seeing more now too in the literature is about like what does it mean to be an authentic leader, right? And what that looks like.
Mhm.
But I think as you mentioned too, it's like you can decide to be authentic in the workplace, but especially centering on Black women, it does come with if you are authentic and you're confirming a stereotype, you have to be okay with that. I talk about that in my research of like the benefits and costs of like even shifting and being authentic. If you're more of your authentic self in the workplace, it could be a greater benefit, right? In terms of feeling more comfortable, feeling like yourself. But
Yeah.
unfortunately for Black women, because of those stereotypes, it could be also come with the cost, because of potentially if it is confirming a stereotype.
Yeah, and I think there's so much there. And I love that about your work that you highlight the complexities. We just deserve agency. Like, I know that I have a work self. The way that I talk to my niece is not the same way that I talk to my best friend. And that's normal. That's okay. So it's not saying like, oh, I need to be able to go to work and like do and say anything that comes. That's not when we're talking about authenticity in the workplace. We're just saying the agency to choose to show up how I feel comfortably, like you said, in this environment, what works for me, not having to navigate this double consciousness of like, oh, but if I say this, they're going to think that, but teaching people outside of Black women how to shoulder some of that work too and say, let me learn how to check these stereotypes. Let me learn how to, you know, humanize humans that I'm interacting with and like see them as unique and as representations of themselves, not just as a caricature, I think is such important work so that Black women can have that agency and choice of like, I want to share this or I don't want to share this, but not, I can't. I don't have the option to that other people can more freely make those choices.
Yeah, I love that, the agency. Yeah, I'm gonna stick with that. I love that. What would you say are the emerging trends that will shape the future of research on like anti-Black racism in the workplace?
That's a great question. I don't think I'm good at predicting trends, I'm gonna be honest, but I can tell you what I hope to see. I hope to see much more work, especially in psychology, that does a better job of including more Black women in our samples. I think that we are shockingly bad at that. That we still have predominantly white, highly educated, higher SES, people who are working at a desk in an office, like those are our samples, but that's not the population. Like that doesn't represent everyone. So I think we need to do a better job of building trust with communities so that they are open and willing to do research because people are hesitant, very understandably, based on the history of what has happened to Black people and Black women, with scientists and with people in these white coats. So, all that to say, I hope to see a lot more representation in our samples so that we can get into the nuance and the diversity and the variance within Black womanhood and really have more data to talk about that in a more complex way, not even always grouping like Black women as compared to other groups, but really getting into this population and the diversity and celebrating it. I also want to do more work and hope to see more work on the positive side. Now, not being like, what's the term, like Pollyanna, where you're like it's like toxic positivity. So not that, but like what does thriving look like for Black women in the workplace? Like I want us to conceptualize it, measure it. I want us to find the predictors. I want to help people experience it because I think even me, like I think sometimes when I'm like I'm making it, I'm like, oh, that's an accomplishment. Like that's great. But I'm like, but I also want us to feel like engaged and I want us to feel in the state of flow, like we're creative and we're doing the work that we love. But that takes some work on these structures and policies and environments to give our brain the space and the freedom to feel that kind of thing. So I hope to see a lot more of Black joy and thriving and happiness in our studies as well.
Yes, I love that. I love that. If someone was interested in learning about IO, what advice would you give them?
So, IO psychology is so interesting to me because I feel like it's the area of psychology that people don't really know what it is. And then when you learn what it is, you're like, oh my God, like it's everywhere. Or maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm biased. You could tell me. So,
With you, I'm with you.
so I think that finding just intro classes on IO psychology, like if your school offers it, taking it, even if you're like, it's not only just for people who have decided they want that to be their career field, right? Because in an IO psychology class, you will learn about existing and succeeding in the workplace, which we all in some way or, shape or form will be trying to do later in life, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're job seeking, like looking for a job. The research is in IO psychology touches that, whether you want to pursue leadership or not. And so you will learn about motivation, selection, which helps you as you're applying or selecting people. Definitely leadership, teamwork, which all of us have to do in some way, right? So I think taking those introductory classes at your school if they have it or a neighboring school and also thinking about getting some experience in a research lab if you can, so working on IO psychology research, seeing how these studies are done could also help you consume the literature that's out there and understand like what goes into these studies. And then there's just a lot of online resources where I'm like, when I was a kid, I feel like I'm about to date myself. When I was a kid, I wasn't so easy to just Google and find resources on all the things. But looking up, the Society for IO Psychology has a lot of resources. Like, what is it? What are career options? And there's so much available now online. So I think if you're interested in it, those are really good first steps to kind of feel it out and see if you would like it.
That was Dr. King. To find out more about Dr. King, including her research and publications and social media handles, go to this episode on our website podcast page. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast. We have some great guests already lined up for our upcoming shows, so be sure to check out our episode topics by going to our website, www.psychologyofblackwomanhood.com. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. To stay up to date with our upcoming episodes and to get all the updates about our related activities, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Thanks for joining us.